the increase in hate crime and racism, which is directly linked to the outbreak of the coronavirus. And we've got two excellent speakers joining us this evening, three excellent speakers, should I say, joining us this evening, who will speak for about a few moments as by way of introduction, and then we'll open it up to a wider discussion when viewers will be able to put questions to the panel. On the panel this evening, we have Suresh Grover, Marc Wadsworth, and Shamsher Chohan. Suresh is going to be the first speaker. Suresh is a veteran anti-racist activist and was deeply involved in community-led self-defense campaigns and supported the Anti-Nazi League in the late 1970s that was established to challenge the rise of the National Front. He's led anti-racist campaigns all his life and experienced a violent racist assault as a young man when he was stabbed by racist thugs. Suresh founded the monitoring group to tackle the scourge of racism and was one of the founders of the Stop the War Coalition in 2001. So over to you, Suresh, if you could just open the discussion this evening, and then we'll move on to Marc and to Shamsher.
Thank you, Chris. The points I want to make are these. It's absolutely shocking that we are experiencing a spike, quite a dramatic rise in race hate crimes, specifically against East Asian members of this country, or community members, as well as general forms of racial violence against PME communities in the country. I actually thought, because of the lockdown and because people were going to be social distancing as well as indoors, that you probably would have a decrease in reporting of race hate crimes. Over the last 3 months, from January to March, we've seen an explosion of referrals to us. Normally, if you look at the figures for the last quarter of the last year, we had about 150 inquiries. That has been shot up to 260. The referrals coming from statutory agencies who are unable to cope with these cases has gone up by 122%. I've dealt with cases of Chinese individuals and families who have suffered serious cases of violence as well as abuse, incidents such as being spat at on the tube because they're wearing a mask, Chinese students being attacked physically in Southampton outside their youth hostels because people are linking the perceived disease to them. We have had cases of individuals who may look Chinese but from Southeast Asian countries such as Japan and Singapore who've been assaulted. I'm dealing with a woman who was greeted by two men in Chinese and then urinated upon. What's staggering for me, and I've been dealing with these cases for some time, for over 40 years, and as you've introduced, I was a victim of racial violence myself. What's staggering for me is that the response of the police is actually quite negligent and bad. They've started passing cases on to voluntary and organizations and charities, and it takes 3 times as long to get a response from them, even in terms of taking a statement. And working from home, talking to victims of racial violence who've suffered not just the physical abuse, but the trauma of being attacked and the consequences and the impact of being attacked in a very public space, like a queue in a supermarket because they're Chinese. It takes 3 times as long because of the nature of the circumstances of COVID-19 being locked in, actually taking a statement, getting things done, etc., etc. So the explosion of and the spike is very real, and it is actually very dangerous. Why is it very dangerous? I think the narrative is led by politicians and media who've started to play the blame China game. People and racists and people who hold racist views are beginning to see Chinese individuals and Black communities as the other and begin to harass and attack them. And actually, unlike in normal times, they don't have any supporting structures. So the resilience that people are depending on is their own self-resilience. The other point I want to make is that in terms of race hate crimes and hate crimes generally, our research last year showed during Brexit that actually the reporting figures are actually serious, and only one in out of every 10 person reports to the police. So the reportings are 10 times less than they should be. So even though the police record something like 58,000 racial violence cases, hate crimes throughout the year, out of which 70 to 80% are racially motivated, the actual real figures of people suffering racial violence is actually quite serious, including Chinese. And if the reporting figures are 1 in every 10 person for Black and minority communities, it's actually even lower than the Chinese community. So we have a huge problem. I think Sky did a survey yesterday, and they found that something like 279 Chinese individuals had reported to the police. But what we don't know is what the outcome of those investigations are, etc. That's the general micro point which I want to make. The second point I want to make is that actually, when it comes to racial violence, it's very easy for politicians and newspapers to start condemning the most starkest, most visible, and the most violent form of attack. What isn't taken into account is the structural racism which feeds into racial violence and race hate crimes. And the legacy of the Stephen Lawrence case isn't just the attack and the murder, but the fact that the police were found to be institutionally racist because of the litany of failures that took place, some of them of epic nature, and we all know about them, and I don't want to go into them. So state institutional racism, which is the foundation of racial violence, and notions of respectable racism flouted by the media and politicians go unaddressed, including those held by our prime minister at this moment. So the Blame China game played out in the newspapers, coupled with state racism, makes this position, makes the notion of dealing with racism very, very acute and dangerous at this time. Why is it dangerous? Because if you look at on an international scale, given what Trump is playing in terms of attacks on China, in terms of his policies of protectionism, and in terms of his own negligence of dealing with the COVID-19, it actually creates a political scenario where you may have skirmishes between China and United States for his own failures and for his own reasons. And that's a genuine feeling felt by a lot of Chinese students and Chinese communities in this country. In terms of general racism, which we need to discuss when we discuss racial violence, I think we've gone backwards since the Stephen Lawrence case. What has happened is that you had a real energy post-Lawrence to tackle different forms of racism. And now, as a result of the discussion on the IHRA, the discussion in terms of very personalized notions of hatred, which actually are quite meaningless in my view. And I've been dealing with them for 40 years because you can't really define hate. And whereas there is a context and an impact and the economic or political context around how racism flourishes, that is totally lost in terms of the narrative and the discussion we have on racism. There isn't even at this moment a discussion on the international and anti-colonial formations of racism and how it informed both how racism flourishes and how it is countered and how it is combated in terms of the struggles that have taken place historically and how they're informed today. So I think what's actually happened is that because that definition of racism and anti-racism becomes so hollow, Black communities have become mere spectators in that debate on racism. So what you have at this moment is when you want to deal with institutional forms of racism in the health service and the disproportionality of BME communities suffering in this national emergency, the response of Labour is to have the ethnic kind of game being played. So in the inquiry they're having, the scrutiny in terms of the health service, who are the components of it? People haven't been chosen because they've dealt with racism, they've been interested in structural racism, but they've been chosen because they are from the Sikh community, the Muslim community, the Jewish community, etc., etc. And actually, that's 1970s failure. What the Lawrence case showed was that you have to deal with racism in the context that it thrives. And what Labour needed to do was to actually develop a concerted, cohesive inquiry involving individuals who are specialist health workers and experts or interested in notions of institutional or structural racism. And I think that connection between racial violence and the hollowness of definition of racism that we live in has serious consequences of where we're going in the future. I'll stop there.
No, thanks very much indeed, Suresh. That's a really good introduction to tonight's discussion. And I was struck by your latter comments in particular really there. And one of the reasons why I'm working with a number of people now to try and create a new grassroots movement is to try to raise political consciousness and to address some of the issues that you touched on there really. And that has been a failing, I think, of the Labour movement in terms of raising consciousness in that sense, and it's something that we hope to address, as it were, if we can make this movement successful. I was also struck by your comments about the increase in hate crime, and I was looking through some police statistics. The police have actually been monitoring this, and the latest returns from all the police forces around the country has shown that there has been a threefold increase in race hate and racism, directed particularly at people of Chinese heritage. So clearly there's a major issue there, and it's something that we, I think, as a movement, need to look at and build that kind of collective community solidarity, as we've done in the past and as we continue to need to do today. I mean, as Tony Benn once said, there are no final victories, just as there are no final defeats. Generation has to fight this battle over and over and again. And I had thought that we defeated the kind of racist fascists in the 1970s, and it's so depressing to see them making a comeback, as we've seen with the likes of Tommy Robinson and so on. But anyway, look, our next speaker is well known to many, I'm sure, who are viewing this program this evening. It's Marc Wadsworth. Marc's the co-founder of the Grassroots Black Left and a founder and former leader of the Labour Party Black Sections movement in the 1980s, of which Grassroots Black Left is the successor. He's also set up the Anti-Racist Alliance in 1991, which became the largest black-led movement in Europe. Its groundbreaking work included helping the parents of murdered black teenager Stephen Lawrence to establish their iconic justice campaign. And Marc also introduced the parents of Stephen, Doreen and Neville Lawrence, to Nelson Mandela, which catapulted their campaign to an international cause célèbre. So, Marc, if you could just say a few words by way of introduction now before we move on to Shamsher, and then we'll invite the viewers to make their comments and ask any questions that they might want to put.
Okay, thank you, Chris. And it's a great privilege to be on this internet platform with you, comrade. You've really suffered as a result of being Jeremy Corbyn's most loyal member of parliament, and the treachery that's gone on, that's been revealed by the leaked document, which I think is like our own Watergate. It deserves to be on that level. But I'm sorry that my colleagues in the mainstream media have not taken it up with the same sort of zeal that they've taken up the weaponization of anti-Semitism, which is a very serious issue. I'm sure we're all bitterly opposed to hatred against Jewish people and any people in our society, people of color, people who are Muslims, people of different faiths. And what happened to you in terms of you being abandoned, in fact, thrown under a bus, like me, like Jackie Walker, like Ken Livingstone, by the very people that we thought were our allies because we'd given them total loyalty. And in fact, we took a bullet for them. And so I'm really pleased to do this program, and that's why I'm here. I'm also pleased to be on the same platform as my good friend and brother, Suresh Grover. We go back more than 30 years, don't we, Suresh? Fighting on the front line, you know, against the racist thugs in Southall who tried to invade in Lewisham, the Battle of Ladywell. They never came to Brixton, where I lived for more than 20 years. We begged them to come, but they just wouldn't do it because they're yellow-bellied cowards. And, you know, these detractors of ours, the haters, as I'm going to call them, I've never seen them on the front line. You know, they're just people who maybe went to posh universities, public schools, and then suddenly, out of nowhere, popped up in Parliament with no track record in the communities that we've served and in the struggle. And I think that that is a travesty, really, and it demonstrates the nature of the people, you know, we're dealing with. They're careerists, they're opportunists, and they've ultimately led to the, I'm not going to put it as strongly as others put it, the destruction of a great Labour Party, but they've certainly caused it considerable damage from within. Some people have called it criminal sabotage. Imagine people on big fat wages, probably some of them on £100,000 a year, sitting in Southside, the headquarters of the Labour Party, and working night and day, not just against the twice democratically elected leader, Jeremy Corbyn, but the members themselves, saying that they want to lose the general election rather than having a socialist, an anti-imperialist and anti-racist in number 10 Downing Street as the Prime Minister. And the sort of bigotry, the sort of sexism and racism displayed by the emails that were in that leaked document is nauseous. It makes you want to vomit. You know, it's unbelievable. You're named in that document, comrade, and I'm named in that document. I haven't read all of the 860 pages, I'm afraid. I've just read snippets where I've seen how they did you in. That's the Jenny Formbys of this world, the Carrie Murphys. You know, I think it went possibly as far as the leader himself in saying, yes, speed up this investigation into Chris Williamson. We need a decision now. He should be disciplined. He should be suspended. You won in court only to be denied that victory when they changed the rules of the game to make sure that you couldn't stand as a candidate in Derby North and put new charges against you. I mean, I'm not going to go into the detail of what these people have stooped to, but I've been through hell in the last 4 years. Trialed by media, not a week goes by when I'm not used as an example, in quotes, of Labour's anti-Semitism problem. A lifelong black anti-racist who has a Jewish grandmother, and I'm being called anti-Semitic. So it is quite shocking. And they've done that to thousands of people in this Salem-type witch hunt, which is like McCarthyism all over again. But enough about that. I think it's more important that we talk about the communities that we come from and the issues facing them. Tomorrow is Victory for the Empire Day. What a travesty that it should be called Victory for the Empire. We're the empire striking back as African, Caribbeans and Asian people in this country. We put the great in Great Britain with our toil, our blood, sweat and tears. My father served in the Royal Air Force in the Second World War, and that's why I'm close to the issue of the contribution made by African Caribbeans and Asians to the war effort. More than 1 million Africans, tens of thousands of Caribbeans who came to the mother country to keep it free from the Nazis, only to face the hostile environment of Theresa May and her Tory government that turned them into aliens in their own country, some of whom went back to the Caribbean, and not just the Caribbean, Asia as well, to die, to be murdered, packed into flights, chartered flights, like latter-day slaves, shackled to security guards, privatized, Group 4 security guards. This is a disgrace, and it's going to take a long time for the Tories to pay their rightful price for that scandal. I was a part of supporting the uprisings in the 1980s, starting with St. Paul's in Bristol in 1980, and then every black settlement in the country that you can think of, Moss Side, Handsworth, Brixton, went up in flames in the fight back against police oppression, state oppression, stop and search, people being humiliated and strip searched in the streets, particularly young black men. And out of that, we have to remember, emerged the Labour Party black sections. The black sections didn't just come out of the Labour Party, it was a natural progression of those uprisings. But I have to say that the black sections initially were set up by middle-class black people, as Darcus Howe of Race Today rightly pointed out. People who wanted to get on. They were being blocked from being members of Parliament. Don't forget, Parliament before 1983 was all white, just like the South African Parliament. We had apartheid in this country. So those middle class, you know, three of them went to top universities. Paul Butting went to Bristol to do law. Diane Abbott went to Cambridge. Keith Vaz went to Cambridge. Little known that the great Bernie Grant went to Heriot Watt in Scotland to study mining. So they were all university bods. But it's right that the black middle class should get their fair share of things. Diane went on to fight for us. So did Bernie. The others didn't do so much. So yes, I mean, as A. Sivanandan once said, Suresh used to be quite close to him. He was a philosopher and a political activist. Well, more the philosopher than the political activist. I think he gave us the bullets to fire intellectually. But he said, you know what? Some of that lot, they don't give a fart for the black working class. Well, I do care about the black working class. And we managed to transform the black sections, not just to be about people getting into black faces in high places. And when I use the term black, I'm using the political term black. African, Caribbean, and Asian people. I detest the term BAME. It must have been made up by some middle-class twat sitting in Whitehall, notice Whitehall, in the Office of Population and Statistics. You know, it's not a word that's used on the street, and it's imposed on us. It's not our definition, and I entirely reject it. Let me fast forward to the situation we're in now, following on from Grenfell. We've just had the second anniversary of that calamitous disaster in that human tinderbox where Kensington and Chelsea Council, presiding over the richest borough in this country, put incendiary cladding on a tower block just to pretty it up for the rich people in that catchment area so that it wasn't an eyesore. Inside were asylum seekers, were black people, Muslims. What did they all have in common? That they were all poor, or most of them were. So there's a class dimension, and Sivanandan is right when he talks about the need for us to think about race and class. So we now look at coronavirus and what's happening. And we see that black people are dying twice as much as white people. And there's a reason for that. And it's not just economic, because those black people in the health service, in care, homes, are pushed into the front line, not given proper protective equipment. Their bosses are negligent. And there's a reason. It's called racism. And any inquiry, I agree with Suresh, should be a community-led inquiry. We have the know-how. Suresh, you should be on any inquiry. We should have a people's black inquiry into what's gone on and what should be done about it. You know, they're heroes in the NHS, and when people clap, they should be clapping for the black people, the same as the white people. It's no good newspapers now discovering that there are black people in the health service. I've been in hospital. I suffered from coronavirus. I almost died. And I know how serious it is. And I was determined to stay out of intensive care because it's a killing field for black people. I'll stop there. I think there's a lot to be discussed. We need to work out how we're going to organize again from the bottom up in our factories, in our workplaces, in our communities. And we need to discuss what is to be done to advance the black struggle.
No need. Well, thanks very much indeed, Marc, and that was a really sort of interesting tour of the history of the movement and the struggles that you've been involved with. And I think you know, your latter point that you was making there in relation to coronavirus is a cruel irony, isn't there, that you know, the black community, minority communities across the piece are disproportionately represented in the caring professions. And yet what we see from these police statistics, this upsurge in, you know, in hate crime and racism directed at, you know, the very people who, you know, overwhelmingly are providing the care and support to those of us who, like yourself, have regrettably, you know, fallen victim to this terrible virus. And again, it reiterates, I think, and the point you made when you touched on Grenfell, you know, the common sort of denoting factor really was class. You mentioned, you know, most of those people were poor, you know, and I think certainly New Labour forgot about class politics, and you know, we need to rediscover that, it seems to me, and we need to rediscover that social sense of social solidarity with each other. And you know, like your parents, my parents similarly, you know, fought in the Second World War for a better world, and you know, to see the way things have gone back in many ways, I think, you know, they would be, sadly both of them passed away now, but they would be turning in the graves at the turn of events that we've seen in recent years, and particularly in relation to the attacks that we're seeing, the hate crimes that we're seeing connected to the outbreak of the coronavirus. But our last speaker will be Shamsher Chohan, who's a good friend and comrade of mine. And then we'll open it to the floor. Shamsher is one of the directors of Communities Inc., and she's worked with a range of diverse communities experiencing discrimination for in excess of 30 years. She developed the innovative Stand By Me project to tackle bystander apathy in responding to hate crimes and incidents, which are increasing, as we've heard in relation to the statistics, across the UK. After being piloted in Nottingham, Stand By Me gained a lot of attention, and it's being rolled out across the country to empower communities and promote solidarity. So Shamsher, if you could just address the audience for 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll, as I say, we'll open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess I'd like to, the point that Marc was saying about the need to organise and the need to respond, I'd like to try and make a contribution to that. So in 2016, there was some research with the Somali community that identified that most of the people that were interviewed had been victims of hate crime, whether that was a range of sort of microaggressions or whether that was being the victim of serious criminal offences. Everybody had been affected in some way. It also found that most people hadn't reported. As Suresh said, there's a very low reporting rate, especially from BME communities, for a wide variety of reasons. But the third point was that although what people had experienced left them feeling distressed and hurtful and stressed, what they found more hurtful was the fact that there were people standing around doing nothing. It was the year of the result of the EU referendum. Hate crimes across the country went up. There were various figures. I think 30% on average across the country, hate crimes went up. People were asking, well, what can we do? How can we support people? We were all seeing the videos